It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I had the privilege to interview Lakeland Head women's wrestling coach Shannyn Gillespie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you got started in your coaching career?
Well, I started wrestling when I was a high school freshman, and I had some very influential high school coaches, and I sort of wanted to, outside of wrestling in my sports career as an athlete, they were so helpful in my life. I wanted to kind of be like them, and that was Coach Elias George and Coach Richard Townsell. This was at Evanston Township High School in Illinois. So after high school, I went on to college, and then I was a state champion in Illinois as a high school wrestler. I was a junior national runner-up from Illinois. I went on to college, Lakeland University, where I was a college All-American for Division I, Lakeland. I took third. And so going back to my high school days, kind of reflecting on how those guys were able to help build, shape, and mold me at that moment when I was 16, 17, 18, I decided that I wanted to be a high school coach. So early on in my high school wrestling career, I decided I wanted to be a coach. And then throughout my college career and international career, I've had some excellent coaches along the way, but way back when I started wrestling as a high school freshman, because of those people that were in my life. My high school freshman coach was actually, I can't think of his name now, Coach Wilson. He was my first actual wrestling coach, and he did a really good job with me as well. And so I would suggest and say and recommend all of those people early on in my life just, helped me decide to become a wrestling coach.
That's so amazing. Can you talk about, of course, your stop at Lincoln College as the assistant coach?
So I think that was 2016, 2017. And that was after I had been a head coach for about 8 years at the United States Olympic Education Center. And I was there from 2004 to 2012. But to answer your question specifically, I coached there because I wasn't certain if I wanted to go back and be a college coach. That was a college coach at the time for a men's wrestling team. Lincoln College is in Central Illinois. And at the time they were a junior college. Now they're NAIA. But when I coached there for a year, I lived in Chicago at the time, so I would drive back and forth from Central Illinois to Chicago where my family was. It dawned on me that I still did have the coaching bug and I still did want to coach wrestling. Although that was coaching men and although that was coaching folk style, I still felt like I could have a huge impact on young people's lives. And so that was in 2016, 2017. Actually, 3 years after that, I coached in high school, boys and girls, in Illinois, Homewood-Floormoorin High School. That was also folk style. And currently, I'm coaching women's wrestling at Lakeland University, and that's freestyle. So I've always had an interest in coaching, and it didn't really matter which style and or which gender. I've just always wanted to be a wrestling coach.
What was your time working with the U.S. Olympic Training Center?
Yeah, so it's a tricky, there's so many different ways to say whatever you just said. So there's an United States Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. I was actually a resident athlete out there from 97 to 99. Where I worked was called the United States Olympic Education Center. And so people sometimes they're like, what's the difference? One's in Colorado, one's in Northern Michigan. So yeah, it's really tricky to say because you're just like, well, which one it is? How do I say it? Who knows? And now they've even changed the name again. I think they've added a P for Paralympians in the place that's in Colorado Springs. But as I mentioned, and as your question is alluding to, from 2004 till 2012, I was the head coach at the United States Olympic Education Center, which was on the campus of Northern Michigan University. So that was my first experience as being a head coach. I had 6 or 7 years on the Division I men's side being assistant coach. So that was my first real opportunity to kind of, I like to say, spread my wings and fly and do my own thing. There, I had the opportunity to basically create the whole program. That program didn't exist before I was there for a women's collegiate wrestling team or a women's international team that was traveling all across the world, all across the US and all across the world. So my experience there was greatly appreciated because not only did I have the opportunity to be a head coach, I also had the opportunity to learn the intricacies of being a head coach, which dealt with recruiting, which dealt with sponsorship, with, of course, dealt with teaching and coaching, but that's like 10% of your job, right? You have to schedule all of these events. And in that case, I had to schedule events all around the world. And I was a lot of times a junior world coach or a world university coach or assistant to the senior world team when they would go to the world championship. So that job was like 7 jobs in one. And I appreciate it because it helped me when I was a high school head coach. It helped me when I was an assistant coach at Lincoln College. And it's helping me now at this position as a head coach here at Lakeland University.
That's amazing that it's helped you that much. Of course, can you talk about what you've accomplished in the women's wrestling and being an advocate for women's wrestling?
So I talked about it a little bit there, and at the start of, I guess, 2004, that was the first Olympic Games for women's wrestling. So that was my introduction actually into the sport as a head coach and as a coach. Prior to that, I'd done mostly folk style and mostly men, I guess all men and all boys in folk style. So I guess one of the things that was important for me was just having the opportunity to coach and giving the opportunity for the women to actually have the opportunity to wrestle. So in 2004, when they put women in wrestling in the Olympic Games, that sort of started, I guess, evolution of women's wrestling in the US. Currently right now, I think there's something like 29 high school states that have sanctioned wrestling state tournaments for girls, and roughly around 90 women's collegiate wrestling programs. So when I got my start way back in the day and having the opportunity to do all of that traveling and then bring it forward until now, I think it's a good opportunity, but I still believe we have a long way to go in terms of gender equity just within our own sport, notwithstanding all of the other collegiate sports that are out there.
Can you talk about, of course, getting the job as the head coach at Lakeland and what you've accomplished so far?
So I think the opportunity when that came up, I was a high school coach in Illinois at Homewood-Floormoorin High School. I did want to get back into collegiate wrestling on the women's side because I felt like that's where I could really have my best opportunity to give back to the sport and help the sport grow. So I stopped coaching actually for a while at the collegiate level just because I had young children that were growing up. Now my girls are turning into young women. One's a college freshman, the other one is a high school senior. So I wanted to take a little bit of break so that I could, kind of be a big part of their lives. As a collegiate coach, as many people know, with the exception maybe of this year, this pandemic year, this year and last year, there's a lot of travel involved. So I didn't want to have that travel interrupt me being a father in my children's life. So I stopped coaching collegiate wrestling. As my children started to get older, probably about 16, 17, I started to have that coaching bug again to go back into the collegiate wrestling scene on the women's side. So when the opportunity popped up, Ben Rosen actually, reached out to me this summer or last summer, and he was just like, hey, there's an opportunity here at Lakeland University. What do you think about it? And, I was already in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, my daughter's going to graduate this year. This would be a great opportunity because it's only about 2.5 hours from Chicago. So it was an easy choice for me. I don't know if I would have wanted to be, as an example, in California or in New York when I have to travel back and forth to try to see my family. Now it only takes me about 2.5 hours to get home. So the opportunity it's a great one. And I appreciate it. And now it's time to make this Lakeland University women's wrestling program first into a national program and then into an international program, because women's wrestling is actually freestyle. We can go to Canada and wrestle, and we can go to Japan and wrestle, and we can go all over the world. Why? Because the international style of wrestling is freestyle and the whole world does it.
That's amazing. Of course, whenever you got the job at Lakeland, what was going through your head as you were just entering COVID at that time?
Well, it actually happened the season before, if you will, right? So there was a transition period where I was a high school coach, and then I was a collegiate wrestling coach. So September 21 was the day that I actually started working here. So if you can imagine, from the beginning of the school year till September 21, I was basically still a high school coach. To directly answer your question, 7, 8, 9 months before that, COVID actually became a big factor and impacted the world, right? So we actually, if you back up to when I was still a high school coach on a wrestling team, we actually had 4 girls qualify for the state tournament that February, but that tournament actually got canceled. So, go from February all the way to September. most of the wrestling events and a lot of the wrestling state tournaments, basically the Olympics, the national tournaments, all of those things actually got canceled. So I actually was already, I don't know if I want to say prepared, but I had been dealing just like everybody else with COVID for the last 7 or 8 months. So it was a struggle and it was a challenge to get through this year in terms of training and competitions and, having a season, but it impacted everyone basically the same way. And we did the best with the cards that we were dealt. And I'm looking forward to building this team, like I mentioned before, into a national program and an international program.
What is the recruitment process at Lakeland in prospective student athletes?
What do you mean? What's the question actually?
What is the recruitment process for high school athletes that are looking to go into women wrestling for Lakeland?
Okay, so I'll give you 2 answers. I'll give you the student athlete's answer, and then I'll give you the coach's answer. The student athlete's answer is they basically do the best that they can in high school academics and high school athletics, and then they apply to the school of their choice, which means, and more times than not, this year's a little bit different because of COVID. More times than not, though, they typically have taken some type of college entrance exam, which usually is the SAT or ACT. As I mentioned, with COVID and the pandemic, these last, let's say 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 months, those tests have not been readily available for everybody. So a lot of colleges are waiving those exams and they're using basically the high school transcript and the grade point average to admit student athletes into school. So usually students will take the college entrance exams, do the best that they can there, do the best that they can in their academics and athletics and my sport, wrestling. And usually they would go to their state tournaments and or national tournaments and or regional tournaments. And then as a coach, this is the coach's answer. My job is to identify who those people are and to contact them and to get them involved with our program through the different social media venues and or calling on the phone. So we've got 2 social media medium, if you will. One of them is a Facebook page and the other is a Instagram page. They can just type in Lakeland Women's Wrestling on both platforms, and they'll be able to see all of our different videos and whatnot and find out more information about the school. And typically I will put a recruit link right in there so they can click that button and then they can fill out the information. Once they fill out that information, it's sent to me, then I contact them. That starts the evolution of the process. And then of course we call them frequently to keep them involved with what we're doing on our end. And so we can actually find out if this is going to be a good fit for them and then follow them throughout the year as they progress academically and athletically.
What does the official visit look like?
Nowadays, it's hit and miss, right? So we had recruiting visits for a minute and then they stopped and then they started again. So now the recruiting visits, I think they started again January 11th. So we've been, in the fall we had it and it stopped and then it started again, I think around January 11th. So typically, if they fill out that form, like I mentioned, I can call them on the phone and then I'll usually send them information. If they figure out how to do it, they can go to our website and click the link that says visit. Once they click the link that says visit, then they can either do an in-person visit, which they come on campus. The academic people in the admissions department will walk them all around the campus at some point. They'll drop them off at my office and then I'll walk them through all the facilities from the athletics department. We'll sit down and have a little bit of a chat. And then because of the pandemic, they actually go home. In the past and when I was in college, there was a little bit more. When we didn't have a pandemic, there's a little bit more involved. I've come into the scene during the pandemic. So basically they are day visits. They look at the whole campus. I talk to them and I talk to their parents, and then they actually can get all that information, like I mentioned before, on the recruit form and or on the lakeland.edu website.
Of course, what is a typical game day like?
So again, this year, tricky, right? We had 3 competitions this year. One of them was the national tournament. The other was the national qualifying event for the tournament. And we had what I would like to call an event. It wasn't necessarily a duel because we're a lot of teams were unable to full dual teams this year because of the pandemic and a lot of things happened where people actually had to just not be on teams because of the pandemic. So, but normally in a normal situation, typically we'll, wherever we're going, if it's a home event or if it's a away event, if it's a home event, typically there's a weigh-in and about an hour or 2 hours later, we actually have the competition. The competition, if it's a dual meet, can last anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. If it's a tournament, It's a little bit of the similar scenario, except now you've got more teams that are actually converging in one. You'll have a win, and an hour to 2 hours later, you'll have a competition. Tournaments usually are about 4 to 5 hours in length. This year, all of the tournaments were typically one day because of the pandemic, and they're trying to reduce the amount of time that you're actually in the venue.
Who are some of the teams in your conference that you compete in?
So women's wrestling is different. So that's like a loaded question. So I'll give you a loaded answer. Right now, as I mentioned, maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago, there's roughly about 90 collegiate women's wrestling programs. At the moment, we are currently not in a wrestling conference per se, right? And so there are some women's wrestling programs that are in conferences, but the vast majority of them are, I'd like to say that they're independent. So their men's team may actually be in a wrestling conference, but a lot of the women's teams are not in a direct conference. So that gives us a little more leeway, right? That gives us the latitude to travel a little bit more inside and outside the country. I haven't seen that a lot from afar. That's what we're going to do in this program. And so I encourage more people to look into this program, because even though we're not in the conference yet, it's, that isn't anything that we can control. What we can control, though, is the competitions and the events in the countries that we do go to, and how we develop a student athlete to become the best that they can possibly be now and in the future. So there's a preparation piece, because some student athletes actually do want to make national teams. They do want to make world teams. They do want to make Olympic teams. And I believe Lakeland University now is the best possible place for them to do that.
Of course, what is some of your future plans for Lakeland University, along with, can you talk about the culture that you have built?
So I just got here and I've been here for about 6 months. September 21 was the day that I started. And ultimately, I'm looking to develop the person wholly, not just athletically, not just academically, but also psychologically and emotionally. Of course, student athletes in high school and college, they're more than just, a student in a classroom and an athlete in whatever venue they're in. There's all sorts of stuff that's going on in their mind. And I'd like to cultivate that so that they can be the best possible person that they can be. So one of the things I usually ask recruits is, or I, kind of give them it's either an open-ended question or it's a statement, but I want them to tell me about their work ethic, because I can develop the work ethic, but I also want that work ethic to be high before they even get here, because in order for them to be the very best person that they can be, they've got to be motivated to work, and then they actually have to do the work. I can put the plan in place, but ultimately I'm looking for them to come in here all the way with a very good, strong work ethic. If they don't know how to wrestle freestyle, and a lot of high school girls do not, because high school wrestling, 100% of it in high school is all folk style. But if they have a good work ethic, I don't care if they can wrestle freestyle, because I can teach freestyle. I've been doing it for 20 years. I feel like I know what I'm doing at this point. If they have a good work ethic and their character is at a high level, then they'll fit right into the Lakeland University women's wrestling program.
That's amazing. What advice would you give upcoming future high school athletes looking to get into women's wrestling?
The first thing that I say, or some of the first questions that I ask them when I'm talking to them on the phone, is how much freestyle wrestling experience do you have? And some of them will say none at all, coach. And I'm saying, well, that's okay. Now that you're talking to me, I would like for you to try to get as much freestyle experience you can, training wise and competition wise. You need both. There needs to be a balance. I wouldn't ask a student to take a test without studying. And I feel like studying in freestyle is actually going to the training practices and doing as much training as you possibly can get. But then you need to have the test. You also need to, test yourself against the best in your area, then in your state, then in the country. And that happens by going to competitions.
What advice would you give upcoming future coaches looking to get into women's wrestling?
I would say look at our social media channels, because I put a lot of information out there on how and what to do in terms of technical training. So go to our Facebook page and go to our Instagram page. Usually you can just type in Lakeland Women's Wrestling and that information will pop up. And then I would also suggest for them to go to CoachShannyn.com. I put together, right after I got done from the Olympic Education Center in Northern Michigan, I put together basically like a blog. It's a website, and it has, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 different blogs, and it talks about all of the information that is important for a coach to know. If they're going to coach women or if they're going to coach men. Essentially, most of those things are very similar. I've found in my experience coaching girls and coaching women, the coach has to learn how to listen in a different way. Now, if you've only been coaching women forever or girls forever, you probably don't need to learn that specific skill. But if you started off coaching boys and men like I did, there's a different listening style that you would have to learn. And then there's a different communication style that you actually have to employ and implement. So for a new coach coming in on the women's side, those would be my 3 or 4 different suggestions.
That's great advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media along with Lakeland Women's Wrestling at?
So I have, and this is maybe to back up to that last question, I would also say younger coaches or newer coaches in general, I don't care what sport they're coaching or what gender they're coaching. I would say social media is a great avenue to get your information out there. So personally, I have my own personal social media, and that's Shannyn Gillespie. That's my Facebook page. I'm also on Twitter under Coach Shannyn. I'm also on Facebook under Coach Shannyn. I'm also with the other side, which isn't necessarily me, but I manage the pages, Lakeland_women's_wrestling. That's on Instagram. I'm also on Instagram as Coach Shannyn, and Facebook, I think I don't know what the precise wording is for the Facebook page, but if they do Lakeland Women's Wrestling, Lakeland University Women's Wrestling, that page will pop up. So I suggest that those are great vehicles to get the information out to the public and the students and the parents, because more times than not, parents want to know, has this person been coaching women and girls? Is this person experienced? Does this person know what they're doing? And if you've got those social media outlets, people can quickly look that stuff up and figure out how long you've been working and what your resume is, and if you have the experience and the wherewithal and the capability to get them to the next level.
Thank you again, Coach Shannyn, for your interview, and best of luck in this upcoming season.
Thank you, Brandon.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at @talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Shannyn, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.